Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking an absolutely wild intersection of government secrets, religious theology, and non-human intelligence. Seriously, over the next few minutes, we're going to visually break down an internet rumor that has just completely captured people's attention lately. But more importantly, we're looking at exactly how political and religious commentators are analyzing the whole thing. We are talking alleged clandestine meetings, fears of mass public panic, and, yes, even reptilian creatures. Now, I want to be super clear right up front. We are strictly looking at the anatomy of this rumor and the specific reactions to it from our source material. We're staying completely neutral here. Because honestly, whether you're a hardcore skeptic or a total believer, the psychology and the cultural conversations surrounding this are just incredibly captivating all on their own. Okay, let's dive into this. The entire conversation kicks off with this specific, really inciting quote from well-known evangelist Perry Stone. Stone basically went out and claimed that a group of pastors were invited to hear from, quote, men in the U.S. government. And what were they supposedly being briefed on? Well, allegedly off-planet crafts and literally reptilian creatures. I mean, that is quite a massive claim to just drop on a public platform. And, as you'd expect, it immediately sparked a huge wave of intense discussion and, of course, intense skepticism among commentators who closely track both political news and religious culture.
All right, let's get into section 1, the secret Tennessee meeting.
So let's set the stage here and look at the specifics of how this alleged gathering supposedly went down, because according to the rumors spreading online, the logistics of this meeting were honestly just as bizarre as the subject matter itself. We aren't talking about, a highly secure bunker in Washington, D.C. or some classified military base. No, the location was reportedly a rented Airbnb tucked away in the mountains of Tennessee. The attendees were said to be a large group of high-profile evangelist pastors, and the hosts were described simply as U.S. government insiders. The sheer contrast here is just striking, right? The idea of the absolute highest echelons of national security holding a summit on extraterrestrials at a mountain vacation rental, it's exactly the kind of detail that makes commentators immediately raise their eyebrows. But why would the government supposedly do this in the first place? Well, our source material highlights the rumored motive, to get ahead of what they call disclosure. Disclosure is basically the term used for the moment the government theoretically comes out and admits to the existence of alien life. The rumor suggests that authorities are actually terrified of mass civil unrest, specifically among religious populations. So the theory goes that the government wanted to establish a unified message through these pastors to somehow keep their congregations calm when the undeniable truth finally comes out.
Moving right along to section 2, reptilians and alien crafts.
Let's see how this builds, because the claims about what was actually discussed at this Tennessee Airbnb get even more specific. The subject matter allegedly presented to these pastors wasn't just, vague lights in the night sky. The discussion supposedly centered on tangible, recovered off-planet crafts and materials that are distinctly not of this earth. The commentators analyzing this rumor specifically pointed out that the descriptions being thrown around sounded a lot less like a standard dry intelligence briefing and way more like a script for a sci-fi movie. Or maybe a classic H.G. Wells novel, complete with those reptilian beings we mentioned earlier. But you see, the crazy technological claims aren't the real reason the government would allegedly fear a massive religious panic. It's the theological implications. One of the commentators actually referenced a documentary called Mirage Men, pointing out a specific, very long-standing rumor in UFO circles. It's the idea that part of the ultimate disclosure will be the claim that the human race was actually manufactured by extraterrestrials. Now that is the core conceptual threat here. The entire rumor hinges on the idea that if aliens showed up tomorrow and claimed they created us, well, the whole foundation of modern religion would just instantly collapse.
Which brings us to section 3. Will aliens break religion?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it frames the commentators' reactions and their analysis of whether this rumored government fear actually aligns with how religious believers think in the real world. There is a massive, massive contrast here between the rumor's premise and the commentators' response. On one side, the rumored government fear is that discovering alien life will shatter faith and cause utter mass panic. But on the other side, the religious commentators in our source material completely reject this. They argue that for a true believer whose faith is deeply rooted, the sudden appearance of a non-human intelligence making grand claims about human origins, it wouldn't shake their foundational beliefs in the absolute slightest.
To really illustrate their point, one commentator offered this incredibly vivid, hypothetical response. They argued that if a literal reptilian creature actually showed up and claimed to have invented earthly religions, a devout Christian wouldn't just suddenly abandon their faith. Actually, their immediate logical and theological reaction would be to view the creature as a demonic deception. They literally quoted, "Get behind me, Satan." The big takeaway here is that believers would completely question the alien long before they would ever question their own faith.
Because the commentators find the entire premise of this rumor so wildly disconnected from actual religious behavior, they strongly suspect alternative motives. They repeatedly use the term psyop in the source material, which is short for psychological operations, or SCOP, as they sometimes refer to it. They heavily suspect that this whole Tennessee Airbnb rumor wasn't an actual top-secret government briefing at all, but rather a manufactured story. They think it was perhaps invented by internet atheists or trolls, designed specifically to mock believers, test the reactions, or just deliberately stir the pot during a time of pretty high cultural anxiety.
Let's look at Section 4, Whistleblowers and Disclosure Rumors.
And this brilliantly illustrates why we need to ask, why is a rumor like this gaining so much traction right now? Why is the internet so totally primed to believe a story about a secret alien briefing in the woods? Well, there is a very real, tangible surge in official and semi-official chatter happening right now. Just recently, former intelligence officer David Grush has trended globally as a major whistleblower. Plus, the commentators note that there are widespread predictions of aggressive disclosure ramping up in the next 60 to 90 days. We even have present-day mentions from the White House and figures like Kash Patel about the impending release of classified files. This steady drumbeat of actual, real-world news creates a highly fertile environment where a totally wild rumor about an Airbnb meeting suddenly sounds, vaguely plausible to a whole lot of people. Part of this huge shift in the cultural conversation is actually a shift in vocabulary. The commentators point out the new alphabet soup of modern disclosure. We aren't really just talking about UFOs and aliens anymore. No, the official terminology that's increasingly being used by government officials and whistleblowers is UAP for the crafts and HI, non-human intelligence, for the beings. And using this very clinical, bureaucratic language, it makes the whole topic feel so much more official and, frankly, imminent. Adding some serious fuel to the fire, the commentators recalled a bold prediction made by a fellow media figure, Steve Deace. He recently stated on air that we are going to see at least one elected official publicly claim to have directly communicated with non-human intelligence. Now, looking back at that claim in light of this crazy new pastor rumor, the commentators openly wonder, maybe jokingly or perhaps slightly seriously, if Deace actually had inside knowledge of these alleged Tennessee meetings before anyone else did. Finally, Section 5, Who Breaks the News? As we reach the final phase of their analysis, the commentators do a great job of bringing the entire conversation completely back down to earth by applying just some basic political logic to the situation. So, the crucial point is this. The mechanics of the rumor completely fail when you stop and consider the actual reality of the presidency. On one hand, the daily tasks of a president involve managing the massive global economy, oil prices, interest rates, things like that. But on the other hand, the revelation that alien life exists among us would unequivocally be the biggest story in the history of mankind. It is logically impossible for a commander-in-chief to casually juggle mundane housing programs while secretly managing the existence of lizard people on the side. They systematically break down why a quiet, hushed leak makes absolutely zero political sense. If non-human intelligence were real, the entire government apparatus would have to pivot entirely to address it. Furthermore, they impartially, but pretty humorously, point out the realities of political ego here. Using Donald Trump as a hypothetical example, they argue that no sitting president would ever let a subordinate, like say a Marco Rubio, be the star of the biggest announcement in human history. They even joked that if it were Trump, the alien spacecraft wouldn't just flash lights, it would literally spell out his name. The overarching conclusion from the sources is that true disclosure would be a massive, unavoidable global broadcast right from the Oval Office, definitely not a nameless, quiet leak to a group of pastors at an Airbnb. Ultimately, the source material suggests that rather than shattering faith, an event like this might actually bring believers much closer together in their shared worldview. It's such a fascinating lens through which to view these modern internet rumors. So I'm going to leave you with this one big thought to consider. If the ultimate disclosure actually happened tomorrow, do you think it would completely shatter our earthly beliefs, or would it unite them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.